Hey everyone, welcome back to Intro to DJing. In this video, what I want to do is talk about the relationship between tempo and phase. This is really important because if you don't understand this, you're not going to be able to have very good transitions at all. So this is a necessary condition for having great transitions. The analogy I want you to think about is suppose you're driving down the road and you are in a lane and you want to merge into a different lane. So suppose you're in lane A and you want to merge from lane A to lane B. The first thing you want to do is make sure there's actually a spot for you to merge into. And this is the idea behind phase, is you need to make sure that there is a pocket for you to merge into. But you also need to make sure that the car that's in front of you isn't slowing down, or the car behind you isn't speeding up, so that that gap or that pocket that's there for you actually stays, by the time that you merge over. And this is the idea behind tempo. Once again, we want to make sure that our tracks are going the same speed so that we actually have an ability, a pocket to merge into that's not changing or going out of phase. But also we need to make sure that there actually is a pocket and that there's not actually a car, because you can be going the same speed as the traffic there, but if there's a car directly where you're trying to merge, it's not going to work out very well. So the first thing I want to do is let's hear what it sounds like when the tempos are off. So this is like, you're trying to merge into a lane and the cars are going different speeds, and this is just surefire way to cause a wreck. So the BPMs are different. Not a pleasant experience, and this would be the same idea if it's going a lot faster too. Now, looking here at the parallel waveforms, what you can see is the waveform of B in red and the waveform of A. These little ticks here, the beats aren't lining up, and they're going in and out of phase because the tempo is different. So the first thing you want to make sure is that your tempos are the same. And one way you can do that is by dragging the tempo fader. In Virtual DJ, it's called the pitch fader, and I think this is really poorly named, but we'll talk about that in another video. We want to make sure that the tempos are the same. Now, this is fine. Really keeping it down within pretty much at least, 0.1 is going to be pretty good. Eventually, over time, it will go out of phase, even with a small detail like 0.05. But for most purposes, that's pretty close. So let's see what happens. I'm going to start this track. So this was me making sure that the BPMs were the same and the phases were the same. I clicked play so that the beats pretty much lined up as much as possible. You can't see it now because I, stopped them at different points, but that was what I tried to do, was make sure they lined up. But what happens, so this would be what they look like when they're lined up. Notice how these tick marks line up. And that's one of the great things about these parallel waveforms. You can actually use this to line up the track and look what it looks like visually to make sure they're lined up. But what happens when they're not lined up? Make sure it's actually at. Not a great sound either. So once again, you need to make sure not only are the BPMs the same, but they are in phase, or the beats are lined up. Now, when you're just starting out, one of the things you can do is you can use the sync button, which will basically do all of this for you. So if I'm playing this track, and I play this track, and I press sync, no matter where this is, it'll lock the tempo and it'll lock the phase. Now, in some DJ applications, sync will only work in terms of BPM, or it may only work in terms of phase, but most of the time it will try to do both, and this may be something you have to set in settings so it does both tempo and phase. Now, there's a lot of controversy with DJs around the use of sync, and I'll tell you my views on the matter. The point is you are here to play to the audience and not to other DJs, and maybe there's a couple DJs in the audience. But first of all, are people even going to notice or care that you're using sync? Probably not. And if there are DJs there that do care, they're probably not very fun people you want to be around if they're going to, talk shit about you for using sync. But also, using sync is kind of like using training wheels. It's important for you to develop the ability not to need sync in every case, because there are songs that you'll eventually have, like older songs that were recorded without a click track where it's not directly on the beat, or songs like Sicko Mode where the tempo changes and there's not just one tempo throughout the track. So it is good eventually to learn not to need sync, but when you're starting out, sync is really helpful, especially as you're just trying to understand how to use the knobs, how to understand your interface, with the idea that later on, I mean, it took me years to eventually develop my ability not to use sync, and now I very rarely use it. In fact, I'm more likely to mess up if I do use sync, and I only tend to use it if I'm trying to do some really tricky transition where I really need an extra free hand, or I'm trying to change the tempo of both tracks at the same time, which you can't do when you're not using sync, because you would need to move these faders pretty much exactly the same way. But in all cases, I would say don't be afraid to use it, especially now, but also be sure you're also practicing and developing the ability not to need it, because there are going to be times you won't be able to use it, or it's not going to be perfect. And the best way to do that is simply just put a towel over your computer screen or put a blindfold on and mix tracks together by ear. I mean, that's a great way to practice and learn how to do this, even if in many cases perhaps you'll still be using sync. I know professional DJs who work, they play at the clubs and these sorts of things, and they're still using sync, and you know what? Nobody cares, because they're able to really rock the crowd. So don't let other DJs' attitude about this influence you into doing something where if you could give a better mix with sync, especially now, use it and then still practicing. But anyway, what I think is important here is to understand the way that phase and tempo work and what sync is actually doing, which is not just matching the BPMs, but matching that phase. So hopefully you found this helpful. In the next video, I'm not sure what we'll do yet, but we'll be having fun. See you then.